Welcome back to the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. I'm Olivia, and this is Aaron, my chef de partie.
En garde! Would you like un snail? De croquette? I've been eating baguettes and fromage. What was I supposed to do?
And wine. And wine.
See, it's fun, isn't it?
It is contagious.
See, hers is even worse. It's fun. We're gonna be hitting new depths.
I have what is known in England as the French disease.
And what is that?
When you talk like a Frenchman and have syphilis.
Anyway, so in this episode, we're not just going to be talking about France in general. We're going to be talking about the Normans, the people who lived on the northern coast of France and who were deeply involved in the conflict in 1066 for the English crown that we have been circling for the last 75 episodes. Before we get into the Normans, though, I think it is worth doing a quick recap of the ground that we've already covered so far. What have we already established? England exists.
After, much ado. Much ado about England.
After much ado about England, England exists as a unified kingdom. But in the 1010s, the traditional English ruling dynasty have shuffled off. They were replaced by some Vikings for a bit. Then a different guy who'd been living in Normandy for a bit came back, Edward the Confessor. He became king for a bit. And then, in 1066, he died. Meanwhile, the Vikings of Scandinavia have graduated from basically showing up and shaking down local monks to developing their own kingdoms that can go to war with people. They spent a lot of time fighting amongst each other. Denmark against Norway, Norway against Denmark. Sweden are also here sometimes. And then this resulted in a guy called Harald Hardrada getting booted out of Norway, going on a long, circuitous journey through Eastern Europe, ending up in Constantinople, coming back, becoming the king of Norway, and getting this idea in his head that actually he should be the king of England. Meanwhile, a guy named Harold Godwinson, who is the son of a very sketchy, very murdery man called Godwin, has also gotten it into his head that he should be the king of England because he's the most important and richest man in the kingdom. So that is the most potted history imaginable. But, of course, probably the most important set of characters in this entire story are the Normans. Who are the Normans? Where did they come from? And what have they been up to in the years preceding 1066? And most importantly, who is this man, William the Bastard, William the Conqueror, and why does he get it into his head that he should be the king of England as well?
De ton corps, de tes doigts, de ta bouche, qui me délivrera.
So one of the engines of the political and cultural changes that we've been looking at in this series has been Viking raiding, right? Viking raiding, in many ways, was the catalyst that created the Kingdom of England as we understand it today. It was also the economic engine that transformed Scandinavia from a network of tiny little kingdoms to big kingdoms that can go to war with people. And Viking raiding is once again the catalyst for the creation of the Duchy of Normandy. So the Vikings had been raiding the coastline and riverways of the Carolingian Empire, so essentially, most of modern-day France and Germany, since the mid-9th centuries, because France has lots of big rivers, like the Loire and the Seine, that are very easily navigable, so you can just sail up there, find a local city, shake it down, or loot it, and make a crap load of money.
Because very much the same thing that we've been discussing has been happening in England, of Vikings showing up and making your life a living hell. Maybe you beat them back for a bit, then they come back again and continue to make your life a living hell. That is not an England-specific phenomenon in Europe around this time by any means. Although England, as we've discussed, already is a bit of a peach for the Vikings to come grab. So yeah, already in 845 AD, there's a successful siege of Paris that is led by a ruler who has been sort of tentatively identified with a man who we've also discussed in passing in this series so far, which is Ragnar Lodbrok.
A man who may or may not have existed and may or may not have had very cool trousers.
Allegedly, he has extremely strong, hairy trousers. Lodbrok means hairy trousers.
And he was also the father of Ivar the Boneless,
who was famously born without bones. And Ragnar may or may not have eventually sailed to England to execute King Aella of Northumbria by Blood Eagle. And so, yeah, this 845 invasion, anyways, as I said, it's successful. It's only dispelled after the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles the Bald, pays the Vikings off, as they're doing in England, with a huge sum of gold. As in England, it's pretty controversial. As in England, there's not a lot else they can do.
And also, as in England, it doesn't work.
Yeah, no, it definitely doesn't.
Because they keep coming back. Because again, the problem with the Danegeld, as the English called it, is that it just makes the process of extracting money from the English more efficient. Just you don't even have to fight them.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, the Danes are like, oh, Danegeld. Geld for the Danes.
Yeah.
I'll be having more of that. Anyways, this is a bit of a tangent, but I always thought, I don't know if I'm alone in this, drop a comment in the comments if you are also in this boat, but I always thought that the moniker Charles the Bald was like an Ethelred the Unready type situation, where it was like a kind of archaic meaning maybe of the word bald. I didn't realize his like epithet, or I always thought it was like Charles the Bold, and it was maybe just like an archaic spelling of that. I didn't realize that in Latin he's called like Carolus Calvus, which specifically means Charles the Bald. And it's kind of a mystery whether he was bald, because he's always drawn with hair in the medieval sources, including in like contemporary portraits that were made during his lifetime. But then you never really see bald people in medieval manuscripts, especially not bald kings, do you? Which is sad. Shout out bald kings.
This is proof of my theory that all the microplastics in the water are giving everybody early onset male pattern baldness. That's the chemtrail.
Yeah, no, definitely. Imagining medieval conspiracy theorists being like, increased potash in the water is giving everyone hair loss, and that is why mine.
The sewage, meanwhile, is fine.
Yeah, no, exactly. But anyways, but he was called Charles the Bald during his lifetime. So my question was like, was he actually bald? And no one actually knows. Some people say it was like an ironic nickname, like he was actually super, super hairy. And they just called him Charles the Bald, which I think...
Well, it's like Little John,
If I was bald, I would definitely spread the rumor that my nickname was because I was like absolute wildebeest levels of hairy. I would just be like, I'd be paying people off to be like, oh yeah, I saw the king last night. He's like, he's a total Sasquatch, that guy. He's got hair coming out of his eyeballs. But anyways.
Whoa.
Anyways, as I alluded to already, before we started recording, I found a poem that was written during his lifetime, Charles's, that has been erroneously used by people to claim that he was bald, because it's a poem in praise of bald people, and was written by a Frankish monk named Hucbald. Which I think in like names such as Hucbald, I think the bald part does mean bold, which is why I thought, like,
we call him Bald Huck.
Which is why I thought he was like Charles the Bold, but he's not. But even better, this was written, it was dedicated, so there is a preface dedicating it to a bald Archbishop of Mainz whose name was Hatto.
This is all deeply connected to the Normans, of course.
Yeah, anyways. So, by the way, this is a poem called In Praise of Bald Men. In Latin, it's Ecloga Calvus, so Calvus is Latin for bald. It's a 146-line poem. In Latin, every single word of the poem starts with the letter C for Calvus.
This is very much like, you see those Instagrams, and the caption is like 25 paragraphs long, and they're very clearly not spinning out about the fact that they're bald.
And it was actually like circulated quite widely in the Renaissance when all of that kind of like humanism and like Latinism as a humanist discipline took off. People were really, really charmed by this poem. And actually, a medievalist called Thomas Klein.
Wait, what's the connection to humanism?
It's just, I think they liked that this was like a exercise in like, you know, kind of
Guys, we found the secular art we've been looking for.
in restricted writing. You know, it was like it was a use of like Latin not for kind of church purposes, but as like an exercise in like clever use of language. Anyways, the drain I'm circling, which is, as I love to do, a huge tangent, is that a medievalist had a go at translating the poem himself. So he made the note, this is by a medievalist called Thomas Klein, he made the note that he can't, unfortunately, have every single word start with the letter C, because the word bald doesn't start with the letter C in English. So his sort of compromise on this was to alternate, so it's very alliterative. Almost every word starts either with a C or a B, and he alternates between alliterative C lines and alliterative B lines. So I just wanted to read a little bit out of this, because I don't know when else on this podcast I'll get the chance to, even though it doesn't have anything to do with the Normans. A brainless bloke has badly abused the balds, composing crude carols, so commend in chorus the blameless balds, and bellow the ballad besides. Bless now the bald with bright ballads, O bards! I will begin to braid the bald with bright ballads. Conversely, to confuse the critic's kinky curls. Let all brave bards with ballads brightly bless the balds, and cast their kudos far, but confine for their crimes those brash baboons that bray abuse about the balds. Let the cause of Kojak climb to constellations. Bridle your boosh bristly beastly barbarians, cutting the curl-less with your crafty canticles. Let the bald's beauteous ballad be broadcast. Bless now the bald with bright ballads, O bards. And then wait, there's another part I want to read. Conducting their keen cuirassers into combat, the balds battle as brothers, brave in bassinets. They coil their columns of quick-killing companies, bereave the bushy of their braids, bash them with boots. With coruscating cusps, they cut the connection between body and brain. Bellowed behests are obeyed. Acute in conflict, the clean-crested combatants beat, batter, and bind the barbarians. Catch captives, cut their careers at the cervix. Bless now the bald with bright ballads, O bards.
Amazing.
Anyways.
So you know who weren't bald?
The Vikings.
Yes.
Oh, they were hairy.
Yeah.
They were hairy.
Where do you think they got the hair for those trousers? Anyway,
exactly.
So Charles the Bald did manage to temporarily put a halt on Viking raiding by constructing these sort of enormous fortified river bridges across the Seine in the 860s. But by the 880s, the Vikings are just like, well, there's more of us. We come back with more of us. We can just go around them. And so they lay siege to Paris again in 885.
Yes, actually, I have another poem to read out. Sorry if you're poetried out.
Is this about Bald Man?
No, it's about the siege of Paris.
Okay.
And I think because primary sources about Vikings are so few, and basically no contemporary ones from England during Viking invasions, I thought it would be nice to give a first-hand account that was written by someone who was at the siege of Paris Paris. And to read something that was written from his perspective. Although his poem actually is written from the perspective of the city of Paris, or the sort of conceit as medieval works of literature often have, is the city of Paris lamenting what's happened and begging someone who was, there at the occasion to tell her story. The poem is called Bella Parisiae Urbis, so the beautiful city of Paris. It's written by Abbo Carnuus. This is another translation, obviously. So, fairest city, tell the gift that Danish host, the favored progeny of hell, poured out for you. When Gozlin, the sweetest hero and the Lord's great bishop, kindly shepherd, nourished you. I wonder, Paris said, can anyone relate this tale? You saw it with your own eyes. You tell the tale. I did indeed. I'll gladly do what you command. These offerings the savage hordes poured out for you, ships 700, not to mention smaller ones, tall ships, beyond a number that could reckon them. In vulgar tongue the custom is to call them barks. The Seine's deep surge was packed so full with ships like these, extending 2 miles distance and a little more, that you would wonder where the river had gone, unseen. And so here's another bit. He's sort of telling about the siege chronologically. So this is during the siege. He says, "The night allows no time for rest, no time for sleep. They sharpen, mend, and hammer out swift flying bolts. They get their shields in shape. The old is new again. When old man Phoebus's brightness swiftly climbs inside his kindly chariot and drives the dark night away, and as he goes casts his eyes down upon the town. Lo, Satan's raging offspring suddenly burst out from camp, weighed greatly down by weapons flashing bright. They hasten to the tower as bees and swarms approach their realms, their shoulders spread with thyme and cassia, and blossoms from the trees and pleasant meadow flowers. Just so the unblessed folk took aim against the tower. Their shoulders weighed down by bows and flashing iron, they shade the fields with swords, the Seine with shields. The town is rained with leaden balls in thousands, thick and fast, and bridges and the tower are sown by catapults. On every side Mars stirs and rages, reigning proud. The curving metal bells of church ring out and fill the empty air with clamors of lament." I recommend checking out the whole poem because it gives you a pretty horrible idea of what it's like for the town to be under siege for this long, and the kind of perpetual fear of, whenever the night falls, it just means that the Vikings have retreated back to their camps and their ships to sort of regroup, and they're never sleeping, and they're always coming back.
Yes, so the Siege of Paris stretches actually into 886. So we get a good few months of pretty much constantly this. And one of the leading Vikings, allegedly, in the Siege of Paris in 885 to 86, is a man named Hrolfr, or Rollo, as he's often referred to in the French and English language sources.
Another good epithet. His epithet is Rollo the Walker.
Yeah, or Strider, which is where I think that's where Tolkien gets it from.
What?
Well, Strider.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for
no
Aragorn.
idea.
I mean, we've already, in case you hadn't noticed, there's already a lot of stuff that Tolkien has pilfered from this story. He's just taking liberally from everything the Vikings have ever done. Anyway, we really don't know much about Rollo, Hrolfr, Strider, the Walker, at this point in his life, except that he is just kind of a Viking who's there. Because again, it's Vikings, they're not writing anything down. The only time we read about them is when they go and fuck somebody else up, essentially.
Exactly. Or they carve a runestone that's like, either, I'm sad because my dad died, or like,
This
I
is
had
my
sex
stick
with your mom here. Yeah.
So eventually the Vikings are repulsed, and we next hear about Rollo in 911. Yes, sorry. I'm going to try and take that again. We next hear...
The towers have fallen to the Vikings. The Eiffel Tower.
The two famous towers of France, of Paris, have fallen to the Vikings. We next hear about Rollo in the year 911. Sorry. We next hear about Rollo in the year 911.
Boiling pitch can't melt Danish longswords.
Oh my god. Because the Viking raids have continued to intensify, and the new Frankish king, Charles the Simple, has been forced to reach some sort of long-term agreement with them. Basically what Charles the Simple does, and I'm assuming that his epithet is not meant to be an ironic, this guy was actually a whiz.
I thought he was like a humble guy.
Charles the Basic.
He lived a simple life,
So he grants the Norse a broad swathe of northern France to be their little fiefdom at the mouth of the Seine, basically saying, if you can keep this land, if you keep all the other Vikings out. So essentially, it's poachers into gamekeepers. It's that classic move. And Hrolfr gets named as the Count of Rouen, and the territory that the Vikings settled in becomes known as Normandia, the land of the Northmen.
To be fair, Charles the Simple's father was Louis the Stammerer, so...
It's a positive trajectory. So the descendants of Rollo/Rolfer continued to serve as the Counts of Rouen, and eventually it was elevated into a duchy that was named the Duchy of Normandy. The original plan of just like give this specific group of Vikings this territory and let them kind of get on with it wasn't a fantastic idea, because the first thing that the Vikings did was like, let's get the more Vikings to come and settle in this land. And so one of the interesting things about this kind of initial wave of Viking settlement is that we can see that these people brought the kind of the culture of Scandinavia to Normandy. So dredges of the northern sections of the River Seine have revealed lots of weapons that were presumably deposited there as offerings, which is a classic Scandinavian thing. Just put this axe in a bog, and a local spirit, or possibly Thor, will look kindly on that. But despite that, we also know that, at least at an elite level, the Norsemen, or as they start to be called, the Normans, assimilated very quickly into sort of French elite culture. So they pretty much universally accepted Christianity, probably as a condition of getting the county in the first place, and they also accepted the French language to the extent that the French language was a unified sort of thing at the time.
Yeah, I think there's definitely evidence, especially amongst the elites going on a few generations, that there was still some, like, Norse or Viking identity. So, I mean, for instance, Rollo's son and the successor to the Duchy of Normandy, whose name was William Longsword, he apparently spoke more Norse than...
Do you think he's compensating for something?
It's an ironic nickname. So he spoke Norse, and he recognized his sort of illegitimate son from his illegitimate Danish wedding, more on that later, or in a few minutes, as his legitimate heir. But he also was quite a devout Christian, so all of the stories, life stories, and hagiographies and accounts we have of the dukes and the nobles of Normandy, from this point on, basically stress like how pious they are and how devout they are.
They're not throwing slave girls into ships and cutting their throats and things like that.
No, and he does early in his reign actually deal, which I think this is quite interesting, with a rebellion by Norman nobles who apparently thought that William, was like cozying up too much to the Franks and becoming sort of too Frankified. So I think that gives you a little bit of insight. Clearly there was some tension, but also clearly this process of like Gallicization was happening quite quickly. This is also attested quite well in the language, because as soon as Old Norse stops being widely spoken, we don't have many vestiges of it in French. There are a few. French does have some loan words from Old Norse, and I think some of those are even words that we can prove were loaned into English. So there are certain English words of Old Norse origin which we know came to us from the Normans specifically, rather than from Viking invaders who came directly to England. So those include the word haunt, which originally meant to bring something home or to return home.
Can I just say, that's very evocative and Gothic.
It really is, yeah. Wreck and equip, which comes from the same root word as ship, and originally meant to fit something out, specifically a ship. So to equip used to be specifically to equip a ship. So
we've got spooky ghosts and violence.
Well, we've got homecomings, boats, and sailcloth, and ropes.
All the big, Viking things.
Let's not project too much, but we've got some nautical words coming to French through Old Norse, but mostly it's just French, or the archaic version of French that's spoken in that area at the time, being adopted by the Normans.
Mm-hmm. So most of our understanding of Norman culture in this sort of early first couple of generations comes from a writer called Dudo Saint-Quentin, who is a Picard scholar who was commissioned by Richard the Fearless, who was the grandson of Rollo, to produce a book called the Historia Normanum between the years 966 and 1015, which is essentially a hagiographic history of the Normans, which really interestingly and uniquely for a medieval history doesn't seem to have been drawn from any archival, sources, but actually from an oral history that was and interviews with the people who were alive at the time, which is fascinating to me. I mean, in some ways, it's a deeply Viking solution to the problem.
Yeah.
Which is just, well, yes, my grandfather fought a big dragon in the sea. Write that down.
Oh, interesting. And this Viking this dragon, you say it had 2 heads or 3?
So, according to Dudo, the Normans initially practiced polygamy, which marked them very much out from their contemporaries in the rest of France.
Yeah, so one of the ways in which the Normans are distinguished from their contemporaries in the greater France extended universe of the time is they're pretty accepting of bastard children. In fact, I would say that it would be a bit of an anachronism to say that, at least in the beginning, they thought of bastard children as being a thing in the way that we do, or in the way that their contemporaries
I don't think we think about... the word bastard is not really a current term.
Well, yeah, but it's evocative. We're still using it, in this episode. Oh, he's like William the Bastard.
Yeah.
Well, that wouldn't have actually meant anything to, Rollo, probably, or his immediate descendants. So there's a term that's used in medieval sources that are contemporary to the goings-on we're discussing, and it's marriage is being called more danico. In Latin, that means in the Danish manner. So Danish marriages. So it's a term of slightly unclear boundaries that was used by writers to describe marriages that were carried out not according to Christian norms of monogamy in particular, and of marriage as being kind of a lifelong vow that you take before God. And so these in particular were marriages that were being carried out or were being entered into by Norsemen, often Norsemen who were already married, but it's not necessarily synonymous with polygamy. It's also has kind of shades of being a common law marriage. So 2 people that lived together and had children without being formally married would be considered to be married in the Danish manner. And this ties into the fact that marriage was not as formalized in the early Middle Ages. So, of course, it was a really big ceremonial occasion for nobles. But we've talked about this, I think, on the podcast before, that a lot of common people would just have gotten married by saying, let's get married. And then they would agree to get married, and then they would have to consecrate it.
Or
in
practice,
consecrate it. Sorry, what's
yes.
the word? Then they would have to
consummate it.
And so you can see why it was this type of Danish marriage was a thing. So to give an example, you might remember in the I think 2nd episode of this series we talked about Knut. Remember how Knut the Viking took the English throne and then immediately married Emma of Normandy.
And renamed her.
So she was the wife of the previous English king, and the mother of 2 prospective claimants to the English throne. And Knut came in, married her, made her his queen, despite the fact that he already had a wife. But what's interesting is that he didn't divorce his existing wife or depose her in any sense. He sent her with their son to be the co-regents of Norway, where they were so wildly unpopular they got run out of Norway. But that's neither here nor there. And so that's why I think that the term polyamory, and believe me, or polygamy, not Viking polyamory. Oh my god, my brain is so fried today.
It's never who you want to be who's polyamorous that's polyamorous.
There's always a guy with a big sword. Because there are a lot of Scandinavian sources where they're oh yeah, the Vikings, these just licentious sex freaks. And maybe back at home there was a bit more of that, but I think especially in places like England and Normandy, you do have this interesting recurring pattern of these sort of, for lack of a better term, common law Danish marriages that then the man in them takes on a second wife, in particular a Christian wife, and kind of sets his first wife aside. But it's not a divorce. And so I think, and oftentimes the woman retains status in conjunction to her former husband, especially in particular relating to the status of being a mother of a potential heir to, the father's potential heir.
Well, this is the central issue with Harold Harefoot and Harthacnut, is that they're brothers from different mothers.
Yeah.
And both of whom had a legitimate claim to be Canut's lawful successor.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, the order of, when these people were born and the extent to which they were born within the, confines of a Christian marriage, at least early on in Normandy, does not seem to have been incredibly pressing, or, extremely salient with regards to who inherited their father's title.
Yeah, there's nothing in quote-unquote Norman inheritance law that says that bastards can't inherit property.
Yeah, exactly. So, according to Dudo himself, Rollo had a Moray Danico marriage to a woman named Papa, and she was the mother of the next Duke of Normandy, who was William Longsword. And according to Dudo, Rollo then put her aside to marry in a Christian marriage the daughter of the King of West Francia. And then allegedly, when she died, he returned to Papa. So
Look who comes crawling back.
Exactly. So I think that one is less well sort of confirmed, but it is well confirmed that William Longsword himself, once again, had a Danish marriage to a woman named Sprota. She was the one who gave birth to his son and heir, who was Richard I, the next Duke of Normandy. But then apparently afterwards he married another woman named Luitgarda. So she never had any children, and when William died, his son was Sprota, who was the 10-year-old Richard I, was captured by the West Francian King Louis. And apparently Louis was like, don't worry, guys, I'm not going to kill or depose this child. I'm just going to look after him and teach him things like etiquette.
I'm going to make this disgusting North child into a proper Frenchman.
And meanwhile,
You will know which one of the little spoons to use for each of our 10,000 courses.
Exactly. And meanwhile, he's actually inside his castle kicking around Richard like a football, being like, you are a bastard. You are the son of a whore.
You disgusting pig freak.
Yeah, so he is apparently in there ripping into Richard, calling him a bastard, saying he's a disgusting child and his mother was a home wrecker, basically. Anyways, point being,
Well, the point of that story is that there's a fundamental cultural difference between Normandy and the rest of France based on the cultural values that Normans have inherited from Scandinavia.
Yeah, don't tell me what the point of my story is. Maybe the point of that story was that we should kick around little Danish boys.
Listen, that's what Scotland did in the qualifiers.
Nice. Anyways,
There'll be more of this.
Apparently this experience did not have much of an impact on Richard, because he becomes the Duke.
Your words mean nothing to me.
They free him, so his men free him, and eventually, he kind of fully assumes his power when he's an adult, as Duke. So he has a Christian marriage to a woman. She dies in 968 with no children, and then apparently he meets another woman right afterwards, and she is a Viking, and he has a Danish marriage with her, although the way that this happens, according to the history that is written down, is extremely funny. So, according to the chronicler Robert of Torigny, Richard meets his beautiful second wife, who is a kind of Viking Norman lady named Gunnar.
Hot.
So she's living in the woods with her sister, who is the wife of a local forester.
Extremely hot.
Richard, hunting nearby, hears of the beauty of the wife of the forester, whose name is Seinfrida. So he's said to have ordered Seinfrida to come to his bed, but the lady under the cover of darkness swaps herself out with her sister, who's unmarried. And Richard, it is said, was pleased by this subterfuge because it had saved him from committing adultery.
Well, I wasn't planning on committing adultery, but now I can get to have sex with a different woman.
He's like, well done, you.
Best of both worlds.
No, exactly. So again, cultural differences between these people and, the rest of the friendship play. But anyways...
I wonder what the sister made of this.
I honestly don't know. I mean, she gets to be the wife of the Duke, so that's good.
That's pretty good,
Her family is much elevated by the arrangement, although at first they don't actually get married. So they're just living together in the Danish manor. They have 6 children in the Danish manor, and eventually one of Richard's sons is up for a big promotion. He's going to be an archbishop, but oh no, he can't be an archbishop because he's a bastard child. So Richard marries Gunnar, and he can be an archbishop now.
I think it reflects well on Gunnar that this is the one and only case of somebody being catfished and be like, nice.
Yeah. No, exactly. So...
Interesting.
Yeah, the marriage becomes legitimate and the children become legitimate. So this is like a really interesting transitional stage of marriage and of, opinions and views towards monogamy that we're witnessing, because suddenly, it seems to kind of clear up all the issues now that they're married, the kids are legitimate. So, he marries Gunnar sometime before 989, and, his next, his successor is his son via Gunnar, Richard II, and, one of his other children is a woman named Emma of Normandy, who goes on to be quite the hot marriage commodity. So, again, the fact that these children were born, technically speaking, out of wedlock doesn't seem to have really hurt their standing that much. Anyways, Richard has his son, Richard II, who becomes the next Duke of Normandy. Richard II has his children in wedlock, so he is the first of his line of the Dukes of Normandy to have his children within wedlock. Among his children are the next Duke of Normandy, whose name is Richard, and the subsequent Duke of Normandy, whose name is Robert. Now, Robert is the father of William the Bastard, who is famously a bastard.
Which I feel is unfair, because he's probably, the most legitimate person in this entire line of succession.
So out of this line of succession from Rollo to William the Bastard, there's one person who's not a bastard, or there's one man who's not, every man is a bastard, but there's one man who is not, having children out of wedlock. So... I
gotta say, I finally understand what the acronym AMAB stands for.
Exactly. They all were back then. Anyway, sorry, carry on. But yeah, I think that's a bit of context. So I would be really pissed off if, I came from a long line of bastards, but all of a sudden I was the bastard, the titular bastard.
It was fine when he did it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think, it speaks to the fact that mores have started to change, and suddenly we've broken this unbroken chain of bastardry, and it's we can't go back because we've gone legit now.
Yeah.
We'll say Dudo also gives us some other juicy details about the stuff that the Normans inherited from the Scandinavians. Take some of this with a big pinch of salt, by the way. So one of the things they loved was exiling people. They had a word for it called ulak, which comes from the Old Norse utlar, which means being put out of law. And apparently, according to Dudo, the Normans would exile children based on the luck of the draw.
Yes!
Which is a very that's a very Borgesian concept to be rattling around 10th century France, I think.
That's so cool of them.
One of the interesting things about it is that it's not just this sort of about Dudo's story, is that it's not just the story of sort of cultural practices and individual people. There's a narrative that's woven through it, which is that essentially the thesis of the history of the Normans is that the Normans are the sort of quote-unquote modern-day Israelites and the modern-day Trojans, and they're a divinely chosen people. By the way, everybody loves to pretend to be fucking Trojan. Have you noticed this?
Yeah.
Every single non-Hellenic, non-Roman European civilization is bro, trust me, we're Trojans.
Yep.
who are it's divinely chosen to conquer their enemies and inherit a promised land. And there's a story in Dudo's account about Rollo going to England. And this is almost certainly not true, but it's not true in important ways. So according to Dudo, Rollo once went to England to make an alliance with an English king named Athelstan. Eyebrows raise already. Before he went to go and attack Paris. Everybody in England immediately recognized how cool Rollo was. So as soon as Rollo left, a bunch of English rebels were like, that incredibly cool guy has left, time to go kill the king, because the only cool guy who might be able to stop it is away marauding the French. And the English rebel against their king, and he sends for Rollo to help him. So when Rollo comes back and defeats the rebels, this King Athelstan is so grateful to Rollo for bailing him out that he gives Rollo half of the Kingdom of England, including cities, strongholds, towns, villages, great halls, and half of all the king's possessions.
Wow.
But Rollo very nobly declines because he wants to pursue his fortunes in France, and of course he then later goes on to found Normandy. So this story will get regurgitated at various points in the next sort of 100 years. I'll let you guess at what points it becomes politically convenient. And one of the interesting things is that this story, in particular, is Norman sources really start shouting about it in the 1050s. Around about the time it's becoming clear that Edward the Confessor is probably not going to have a legitimate male heir from the line of Wessex. And so there is a looming succession crisis in England. So already years and years before 1066, Norman lords have their eyes on England. Anyway, I do have one last source to talk about Norman culture. It's a book called The History of the Normans by an Italian monk called Amatus of Monte Cassino. So we've talked up to this point about Norman culture as the sort of Scandinavian influenced, but still intensely Frankified society. But there's another thread from Scandinavian culture that we haven't really talked about, which is their love of adventuring and violence. So we talked extensively in this series about how the Vikings love to get everywhere, trade with, and if possible, kill everyone.
Yep.
From Constantinople and Baghdad to Greenland at this point. And the Normans are very much the same. So Amatus tells us that the Normans scattered here and there throughout all the various parts of the world, making their way into numerous regions and countries. Abandoning little in order to acquire much, these people departed, but they did not follow the custom of many who go through the world, placing themselves in the service of others. Rather, like the ancient warriors, they desired to have all people under their rule and dominion. And so they took up arms and broke the bonds of peace. I wonder if he might be drawing from personal experience. I guess we may find out later. Luckily for the Normans and their love of violence was not something that was particularly hard to find in 10th and 11th century France. Now, we have been sort of slightly evasively referring to the Holy Roman Empire, to Francia, to France, almost interchangeably. But that is because what has essentially been happening over this period is the gradual fragmentation of Charlemagne's empire, the Empire of the Franks, the Holy Roman Empire, has been undergoing, basically from the mid-9th century onwards. And at around about, we're talking, so 10th, 11th century, there's this new kind of emergent polity that occupies pretty much the territory of modern-day France, which is, first it gets called West Francia, and then it just gets called Francia, and eventually, of course, it gets called France. France. So, again, we've been talking about when explaining sort of what is the nature of France in this period and what is the nature of French politics in this period, I want to call up the comparison of England, which we spent so long at the start of the series building up as this very, very efficient, very top-down bureaucratic kingdom. The kingdom of France that we have in the 10th, 11th centuries is so categorically not that.
Is carnage out there.
Literally. They're just murdering each other. It's a bunch of, like, marauding warlords who have acquired, like, titles, essentially. And they're just hitting each other over the head with clubs.
I mean, there's so many places that not even, like, just during this time, but for centuries to come, would be, like, widely regarded as, like, godless savage backwaters where like the light, neither the light of the law nor the light of the Lord can reach.
Yeah.
Like Brittany is a great example because like,
well, they're not even French.
I mean, ish. That's
well, they're
quite,
French now, but they were.
Well, it's questionable the extent to which they were Frenchified. But places like, or even like Picardy, like places that have like basically no de facto ruler, or at least they have like a warlord.
Yes.
But like are out with, they have like an extremely weak ruler, regional ruler, but are like out with the, you know, umbrella of like the king or like of a greater regional ruler. And so they're just complete carnage.
Yeah. I mean, so there is a king of France, but his ability to be anything other than a figurehead outside of sort of Paris and its immediate environs, so think more or less the modern day sort of Ile-de-France area. Really, he doesn't really have any practical power. It's more that the rest of France is ruled by, if it's ruled by anyone at all, is ruled by these local warlords who have made a sort of Faustian bargain with the King of France that, like, I will recognize your authority, and in exchange, you can basically do what you want and not try and steal, and not try and march on Paris and take all my stuff. And in the north of France, where the Normans have settled, there are really sort of three key figures and areas and regions that you need to keep track of. So there's Normandy, obviously. There is Brittany, who are next to Normandy to the west, and Brittany is a region that was settled from the 5th century onwards, mostly by Celtic exiles from Britain.
Well, it's never, most of the settlers that came, like, after a certain point, where Brittany has never been completely Celticified.
No.
So there's always been a pretty large French-speaking or, you know, Romance language-speaking element, but especially, like, as you go towards the west, or towards the Brest, towards the city called Brest.
There we go.
It does get, you know, more and more Celtic, as is, you know, as we also see in Cornwall and, you know, in Wales, the kind of extremities are where the minority languages survive.
Yeah.
Breton was a language spoken by the nobles, so it wasn't like a low status language, but I do think it probably made Brittany into this, like, I think to the rest of France, it probably seemed like this kind of freak, terrifying land populated by, like, absolute weirdos.
Well, who
were quite violent.
Oh yeah, I mean they're like sub Welsh.
Yeah.
they were the Welsh who couldn't make peace with the English.
They're living off of, like, the, you know, 500-year-old ancestral memory of having been Welsh, and, like, they feel it within themselves.
It was taken from them.
Yeah,
I feel more or less the same way.
And I think this is perhaps partially why the Normans are able to kind of set up shop so quickly and kind of throw off their, you know, Nordic robes and don their French attire so quickly, and why it's able to kind of set up, like, your little domain, because everyone's setting up their little domain in France. It's the opposite of England, actually. While England is being consolidated and bureaucratized, France is, it's just going to bits.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. There are these three processes that are happening pretty much at the same time. England is bureaucratizing and consolidating. Scandinavia is consolidating, not bureaucratizing. And France is just completely disintegrating.
Yeah.
So there's Brittany, who are sort of rivals to the Normans, and then the other rivals to the Normans to the east are the Flemish, who are another people who are very tenuously French, because they speak fucking Flemish. They speak a weird kind of Dutch. And actually, I think this is another really important point. When we talk about France, we should not imagine pre-revolutionary France as in any way linguistically or culturally unified. France now is the product of generations of a very concerted linguistic and cultural policy concocted in the halls of power in Paris in the 18th, 19th century to turn a bunch of, to borrow a phrase, peasants into Frenchmen. And so it shouldn't surprise us that we have, along France's northern seaboard, we have a bunch of crypto-Welsh people, a bunch of crypto-Viking people, and a bunch of crypto-Dutch people.
Yeah, and even now, there's people in that country who barely understand each other. Just like there's people in Britain who barely, or do not understand, but there's people in Britain who speak, quote, English, who do not understand each other.
Yeah.
You know?
Imagine that magnified 1,000-fold.
Yes.
What's interesting, though, about the Norman Duchy is that actually the Norman Duchy is unusually internally stable. Compared to the rest of these, again, you mentioned like a lot of these duchies, these counties, are really not able to kind of control their nominal territory much more than the King of France can. But Normandy actually is quite well run.
All you have to do in this time is have like a bit of chutzpah, and you can make a lot of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
De ton corps, de tes doigts, de ta bouche, qui me délivrera, qui me délivrera, enfin de toi.
The free companies and used to kind of terrorize the populations around them. And the thing is that we presented that like it was a kind of transformation of how castles were used. That's what castles are for.
Yeah.
The point of a castle is now that the guy that you pay taxes to lives in a big fortress, and he can at any moment ride out and kill you. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, if you look at a map of surviving castles in Europe, one of the things that you will see if you look at France and then you look at England is that France has exponentially more castles than England ever has. This is in part because the castles were the castles were springing up fucking everywhere in France because anybody who was anybody or wanted to be anybody and could command the manpower to get guys to build a castle for him wanted one. It was a way for these kind of small-scale, independent warlords, essentially, to assert their dominance over their local area. Whereas in England, again, England has been living through this kind of period of political instability, there is still this top-down system of military control, where, again, as we mentioned before, you have, instead of the castles, you have the boroughs, these kind of regularly spaced fortified settlements, where, again, these are very explicitly for defense. So for the castle, sort of the shock value of a castle to work, you need a second thing. You need a bunch of guys who are willing to be the kind of fast-moving shock cavalry who are able to ride out from castle, kill a bunch of people in a village, ride back. And this is where we get to the second great military innovation of the 10th, 11th century, which are knights. So once again, aristocratic warriors who have sworn loyalties to a local lord are not new. This is not a new thing. This is something that England had. This is something that fucking Japan had, for God's sake.
Something ancient Rome had, because, you know, your standing in Roman society was basically like one of the big things that fed into it was your horse license.
Yes.
And you could get, like, marks.
Oi, mate, you got a license for that
No,
horse.
literally, you could get, like, marks on your horse license for being, like, a bad boy. And then they would take your horse. You could have your own horse, but, like, they would have government horses. And, like, whether or not you were allowed to have a government horse was, like, you know, yeah, they would. They would, like, keep, are you keeping your horse in good nick? Are you, you know, an upstanding citizen? It's all about, you know... No, actually, this is I can't say it. It's too controversial.
Say it.
Well, it's all about height, right? What do we know about William the Conqueror? He was a big fuck-off tall guy. Castles are the tallest buildings. The horse makes you taller than the person.
In the words of Ken from the Barbie movie, they're man extenders.
No, exactly. Exactly. It is all about, like, the creation of, like, a physical, embodiment of power. And
Yes.
size will always be the physical analog to, like, social and political power, because with greater size comes greater threat of violence.
Well, I think size plus speed in this case.
Yeah, but I mean, in general, the pattern you see across all these different factors is, like, height. Because a lot of the time you don't even get to the point of, like, the horse chasing you down. The fact that the guy can stab you from the horse more easily than you can stab him from the ground, and the fact that the castle can throw bombs and, like, rocks at you easier than you can throw rocks at it. Those are, like, they're not separate from the fact that, like, height is intimidating. Like, that is why height is intimidating, to the point where, like, it doesn't even need to actually be played out. You just see a guy on a horse and you're like, well,
Damn, he's hard. I'm out of here.
I surrender.
What happens in this period, again, this 10th, 11th century period, is that local counts start aggressively recruiting from amongst the elites, but also from even among commoners and even serfs, to serve as professional soldiers and full-time warriors in their retinue. And these guys are called chevaliers because they ride horses.
Cheval.
And this word is kind of adopted into English as cavaliers.
Yeah.
But we're more likely to call them knights in English after the Old English word for them, which was knecht. So put these two technologies together of professional soldiers on horses and places for them to run back to that are basically impregnable for ordinary people, and you get local French warlords being able to exert much more power and control over their local areas. And again, this is a very different kind of consolidation of power than the kind of consolidation of power that we're seeing in England, where power is vested in the bureaucratic state controlled by the king. Instead, this is a technological innovation that allows basically political entrepreneurs to set up their own little mini fiefdoms.
Well, yeah, in England, it's like, we created this formula to derive, like, the bushels of corn per square foot of city wall that each man of working age is obligated to provide, or the equivalent manpower hours. And in French, in France, it's just a guy on a horse with his big stick riding up to you and being like, "Excuse me, sir, have you paid your local council tax?"
And yet, around this time, we start to see local French counts imposing new tolls, new taxes, and new restrictions on behavior in their local areas. Quelle surprise, as they say in France. Now, this does nothing to stop the sort of constant warfare, because now, essentially, you've got new technologies for warfare, new ways to try and kill people. And there is a movement within the church in France and within French civil society to try and regulate this warfare. So there's a mass clerical and lay movement which attempted to impose some kind of order by agreeing the peace of God. And the peace of God was essentially a convention or a covenant that would sort of regulate warfare and protect the innocent. Basically, on the certain days of the week, you can't kill civilians. It was not as ambitious as the Geneva Convention. I mean, literally, it was like that. Yeah, it was not very... The fact that it was not super ambitious in its scope, I think speaks to how bleak the situation was.
Yeah.
But of course, as I've mentioned before, what's remarkable about Normandy is that they actually managed to stay pretty internally coherent, which I think is even more remarkable given all of the sort of laissez-faire... Who cares if this boy is a bastard? Usually in European politics, if you have, like, a bastard replacing the duke,
Yeah?
there'll be some kind of civil war. And they managed to avoid that for, like, a couple consecutive generations, which is incredibly impressive.
Yes?
And one of the signs of this is there's no movement to impose the peace of God in Normandy, because the duke's keeping the peace just fine, thank you very much. And that really lasts up until the 1020s. So this all lasts until 1026, when the Duke of Normandy, who is at that point Richard II, Richard Le Bon, or Richard the Good, dies, and there is a disputed succession between his two sons, Robert and also Richard. Richard III.
Which is funny because, again, these are the first two sons that have been born, like, within wedlock in the traditional sense. So should be quite straightforward, you would think.
No, we're not gonna do anything like this. What do you mean you're not a bastard? This is Normandy.
But my father was a bastard, and his father before
And you will be a bastard as well.
My son.
You're going to go into the family business. Go have sex with this woman, and whatever you do, do not marry her.
And they're still at it today.
Initially, Richard, the son of Richard, succeeds Richard as Duke of Normandy, but his brother Robert then leads a rebellion against him, and conveniently, Richard dies a year later. Say the line.
Vaxxed?
Again,
Vaxxed?
this is one of the issues with this story, is that I'm going to say this now because we've done a couple of these kind of long form narrative stories. This has so many more definitely not assassinations than any other thing we've ever covered.
Yeah. That's because we have to cover like 3 different lines of succession during extremely critical times in their formation. There were also centuries, really, of English history where no one was vaxxed.
So, Robert replaces Richard as the Duke, but he never really quite escapes the shadow of his brother's death. However, he busies himself with A, the duties of being the Duke, and B, the duties of being a true Norman nobleman and sleeping with unmarried women.
Oh my god, yeah. Because he's got a wife.
Yes.
But who cares about that?
Well, this is France. Get on my little scooter and ride away with me.
Do you think the French, like, got their, amorous, licentious nature from the Normans? Like, do you think they were, like, patient zero? Or do you
you mean, Parisians before Rollo showed up?
Yeah, exactly.
Why, I would never think of looking at the heaving bosoms of a barmaid.
Of my neighbor's wife.
I have a beautiful wife at home.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Rollo's like, hey man, you know that you can sleep with other women who are not your wife. I'm full of contempt for the Danes this week.
I think your Danish impersonation is actually worse. It makes the Danish come across worse than, because your French impression is at least that they're like coy and wily. Your Danish one is just that they're like oafs.
They are oafs. You saw what happened in Hampden Park.
Yeah, fair.
Oh, I'm still riding that high, everybody. In case anybody's wondering.
We don't know a lot about his mistress, who is named Herleva. So she is a Norman lady, and she is probably not of very sort of high social standing. So we don't know that much about how they meet.
Well, she's the daughter of, depending on how much you trust the sources, either a tanner or an undertaker.
Yeah, exactly. So neither of these are particularly sort of professions that are well looked upon. They both involve things that are seen as like quite gross or stinky.
I mean, there's money there, but it's not classy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And
it's not aristocratic, crucially. These are working professionals.
So, I mean, actually, the earliest sources we have about her actually say that she is the daughter of a nobleman, but there is a lot of attestation afterwards as well that she is the daughter of a tanner. So
there is contemporary evidence that there's at least a rumor that she's the daughter of an undertaker or a tanner.
Yeah.
It's not something that's made. It's something that if it is a salacious rumor, it's something that's made up and circulated at the time.
Yeah, definitely.
But I am personally inclined to believe it because I think that it certainly colors it provides an explanation for some stuff that's going to happen later, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I know. I feel like I'm always kind of the I forget which one is Mulder and which one is Scully. Is Scully the woman?
Mulder isn't. Fuck.
Mulder is the man.
Mulder's the one who's like, them aliens is real.
Yeah, I feel like I'm the Scully because
Yes.
it's like actually in the historical record, but I think like if anything, the fact that we have these rumors that like she was the daughter of a tanner or an undertaker, again, I think to me it's a little too like.
It's quite cute.
It's quite cute, and I think the amount that this actually happened of, like, noblemen just, like, scooping up a woman from the street and being like, oh, yeah, I'm gonna take you for a ride, you know, it didn't happen as much as I think, like, the legends make it out to happen. But again, the fact that these are, like, the rumors, I think shows how much, like, his parenthood and his social standing sort of influenced his identity and his legacy, that being him being William the Bastard.
I think the kind of the scholarly tradition that I have sort of come across is that probably William's grandfather was a, you know, quote unquote commoner, but he was someone who was connected to the royal court. So not somebody who was like who was some random person off the street, but somebody who was not really fully in the club.
Yeah.
And I think that's the sort of synthesis point that I'm happy with.
And
that there's some kind of question mark.
I think it's a status as well that she passes on to her son.
Yes, absolutely. So this is the important thing is though to bear in mind about this young William, who was born in 1028. Is that he arrives under this cloud of suspicion.
Yeah.
That there's something not right about this lad. And so despite this, politics in Normandy still kind of proceeds fairly stably until 1034, when Duke Robert, possibly out of the guilt of having possibly murdered his brother, announces that he is going to go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land.
Now, I'm sorry, I don't know enough about this. Is it one of them barefoot ones where you're not allowed to wear any shoes?
Yes.
Yes!
Yes, to walk
Those
there.
are the ones that are, like, guaranteed to kill you.
Yes.
And guess what happens?
Yeah, so on the way to Jerusalem, Kelsipres, his health starts to fail.
Like, I'm sorry. I know that, like, any travel in the Middle Ages is dangerous and overland travel is really treacherous and like people we don't have but the fact that people are going on these pilgrimages where you don't wear shoes and walk the whole way to Jerusalem and then dying halfway through is it's not surprising that it ends like that.
Yeah, so Kelsipres, he dies in 1035.
Yep.
And control of the duchy passes to his son William, who very quickly earns the epithet William the Bastard, which, as we have discussed, is deeply unfair.
Yeah.
Because he's like one of the less bastardy ones. He's not the bastard son of a bastard son of a bastard.
Yeah, no, exactly. That would be his father.
Yeah.
Who was not known for bastard. No, his father wasn't. No, his father wasn't a bastard. That would be his grandfather.
And the main, and as tends to happen with a royal or noble minority in the Middle Ages, the result of this is scheming, plotting, and low-level civil war. So Normandy starts to slip into the same kind of feuding that has already engulfed the rest of France. Castle building explodes in Normandy when it hadn't been really up to that point.
It's great that you can measure like the social stability of a place by how many castles they had.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we will see this
Yep.
later in this series. And also, and I don't have time to get into this now, but I did go on a bit of a rabbit hole where there's just the Norman elites just start killing each other in increasingly like mafia-esque kind of plots.
Yep.
Like they literally, it's very Cosa Nostra.
Yeah.
And also it's deeply tit for tat as well. It's just like, you killed my dad, so I'm gonna kill your cousin. There also seems to be, and this is something that's quite subterranean in the sources, there seems to have been a quietly organized coup within the sort of the ducal court, the young William's court. So when people say, "Oh, the King of Scotland was a 4-year-old boy," and it's like that doesn't mean he had any power. Like when there's royal and noble minorities were just like, we're gonna like they would appoint guardians or regents to run the country while the child was growing up. One of the things that is reported about William's court in this time is that his tutor and not one but 3 of the regents of Normandy are killed in quick succession when he's still a teenager.
And they're killed while trying. I mean, a lot of his supporters are actually trying to carry on like his father's work of supporting Norman interests abroad, such as in England.
Yes. And I think it's Odoric Vitalis who attributes like an anecdote from him of like, yeah, I was constantly on the run. People were constantly trying to kill me. It doesn't sound like that was actually what happened.
Yeah.
It sounds like nobody really wanted to kill him. They just wanted to control him. But by 1040, William seems to have asserted some authority and seems to be making decisions for himself because the chronicles explicitly say the Duke did this, as opposed to slipping into the passive voice constantly. But if you think William's out of the doghouse yet, bad news, because in 1046, a coalition of disaffected nobles gathers an army of 25,000 men and marches on his fortress to try and overthrow him.
And he's what, like 18?
He's a teenager.
Poor
so
guy.
the guy's had a fucking horrible time. His dad's dead. He's like all the people who he like grew up with and respected are dead.
Oh, his mom's like not in the picture.
Yeah, his mother's just disappeared from the story.
Well, she's remarried. She's got a new husband.
Hey, stop.
And she's got legitimate children now. To be fair, her legitimate children are like big William heads, but yeah, it's still funny.
Which that's a power move, by the way.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's a sign that nobody really cares about the whole bastard thing. However, when it seems like all is lost, he gets the backing from King Henry, who's the King of France, who basically intervenes to support him in the Civil War. And the Duke's forces were able to defeat the rebels outside of Caen. So it seems like by 1046, William has control to some degree of politics in Normandy. Meanwhile, off screen, hopefully we all remember what's been happening in England 2 episodes ago. As a reminder, so Emma of Normandy, remember her, had been married to Ethelred the Unready, right? But when Svein Forkbeard conquered England in 1013, Emma, along with Ethelred and their 3 half-Norman children, fled to Normandy and sort of waited out, the surprisingly and unexpectedly short reign of Svein Forkbeard. After Svein died, they returned to England, but the children were banished again in 1016 when Canute was acclaimed king and Emma eventually married him.
Which is so brutal from Emma. You can see why Harthacnut, who's like her son, exiles her as soon as he gets the chance, because she just.
I think she's a bit of a psycho, this lady.
Oh my god, she's such a psycho. I mean, she and Canute, my god, like she was his queen and she was more fearless than him and blah blah blah. It was real. Like
the Joker joke.
The Joker joke. Anyways,
So what this means is that the sons of Ethelred, so the future Edward the Confessor and the future Alfred the Blinded and dies in an abbey, spend their formative years in Normandy under the protection of Duke Richard II. So Prince Edward is often recorded as a witness to Richard II's charters, and in some is even recorded as King of the English. This seems to be a very deliberate ploy by Duke Richard. I mean, it's the Orhan Chalabi effect of like, let's keep this dispossessed claimant to the throne around because it would be useful to just sort of throw him at England at some point. And of course, if in the event that Alfred or Edward did somehow improbable as this sound, if either of them one day became king, they would owe a great debt to Normandy. My master plan has paid off fabulously.
Yeah, and as we said, like Emma of Normandy, who is the Queen of England,
has been unceremoniously renamed Elf Gifu.
Knut is like, I just close my eyes and pretend it's my first wife instead of this shriveled Norman hat. No,
Listen, many such cases.
Just kidding.
A lot of people have this problem.
But again, it's it's an interweaving and an intertwining of these family trees.
Yes.
And there's clearly like a mutually beneficial relationship that both the English and the Normans are trying to draw out here, because as we said, Emma is like the great great aunt of William himself. So yeah, the connection between the Normans and the English throne is not that distant.
Yeah, and it's growing stronger every year. I mean, we don't really know what Edward was up to when he was in Normandy at the time, but we know from what he does when he gets back to England that he developed a very strong taste for Norman culture and a lot of sympathy for the papal reform movement that was growing in influence in the church, and particularly in the Norman court around about this time.
It's really funny because you never hear about people who are exile in England and like return home with like a huge taste for English culture. I don't know why that is.
That's sort of what happened to me. So Edward, of course, returns to England in 1041, when William the Bastard is only 12, but had been Duke for almost 6 years. So they were a generation apart, but they would have known each other.
Yeah, I mean...
He would have just been like the layabout Uncle Edward.
The idea, yeah. No, not a layabout. Like the really nerdy gay uncle who never gets married. The idea that they wouldn't have crossed paths.
No, they would have had a relationship of some kind.
In a meaningful way is, it's pretty much unthinkable.
After Edward returns to England, it seems entirely plausible that the two would have stayed in contact. I mean, they were on either sides of, the English Channel, which is an incredibly important shipping lane. Normandy and England are deeply connected, and as we've mentioned before, there were many Normans who were brought into the court of Edward the Confessor. So it's perhaps on the surface not that surprising that one version of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle claims that in 1051, Duke William did visit England and was received by the king. Whether or not this meeting took place, what was discussed at this meeting, if it did happen, and whether or not any promises were made has, and I am not exaggerating here, been a subject of debate for the last 1,000 years.
I think the idea that, like, while Godwin and his sons are exiled because they've just been booted out of England for being, like, we rages.
For doing Coen Brothers shit.
Yeah, exactly. The idea that, like, while this would happen, Edward would, look at his beautiful wife who has not yet borne him any children, and his, realm that is threatening to do unrealmly things. The idea that Edward would not see his relationship with the Normans as one avenue for shoring up power against these insane people. First of all, and the idea that he has not been, like, shoring up power against the insane people via the Normans with it in mind that he might one day be succeeded by one of them rather than, again, an insane person. Because again, like...
Britain's most terrible family.
Yeah, because again, like, the Godwin, the father of Harold Godwinson, is the guy that basically probably killed Edward's brother.
Yes.
And these people are complete loose cannons, basically all of them.
And also, the other thing to note about 1051 is that is after it's becoming clear that Edward's probably not going to have kids, but it's before he sends his embassy to retrieve Edward the Exile from Hungary.
Yeah.
So it's before he gets that idea. So it's very, very plausible that this meeting did take place, the substantiation for us to confidently say that it did take place is not really there, though.
Well, yeah, I think the evidence against it is basically that William was really busy fighting wars in Normandy, and there's, like, attestations of, like, oh, he was at this castle in, like, say, May, and he was at this castle in, like, July. And there's technically enough time for him to have, like, snuck off to, like, England for a week, but it's not super likely that he would have just, like, interrupted military campaigns to do this. But, again, the idea that they had some kind of contact, I think, is extremely likely.
Yeah, I agree. Now, very importantly, Norman writers in the 1050s never make the claim that Edward promised to name William as his heir. However, later Norman writers very explicitly do make this claim. I am kind of... And one of the interesting things is that it's not like Norman writers at the time aren't trying to make designs on England. Because this is the period, the 1050s, is the period where Norman writers dig up the old story about Rollo being promised half of England. So it's very much in the political zeitgeist in Normandy that the English succession is up for grabs, and that the Normans are well placed to potentially take it. And so wouldn't you think that if this conversation took place and William was promised the throne, don't you think Norman writers would be screaming that from the rafters?
I think it's hard to say because there are still a lot of conflicting factions in Normandy at this point. And there are, various people being brought over to England and having things promised to them. So I think, on the other hand, you can definitely make the point that it may have been an open question of who would go over to England. And perhaps William wasn't looked on favorably by every noble in Normandy as the most likely candidate. But yeah, I do take your point.
So I actually think I agree with you more than you think I do.
Whoa.
Because my synthesis take, Edward between 1050 and 1066 does a lot of stuff that's not that coherent. He, on his deathbed, he says that he's entrusting the kingdom to Harold. He brings Edward the exile back from Hungary, and then he brings Edgar Atheling into his court. My read on this has always been he is spinning his wheels, trying to play people off against one another. He is trying to... He knows that there are all these factions. He's trying to use the threat of naming various other people as his heir to kind of keep some kind of power in the court as anything other than a like cipher for the various earls who are the sort of the great men of the kingdom.
But I think he's also trying to keep them happy, because they're the ones that are right there.
Well, he's trying to play everybody off against everybody else. He is, in the words of Mac from It's Always Sunny, playing both sides so that he will end up on top. And at least this is my read. Yeah. This is my interpretation. Take this with a bucket of salt. And so I think, just like on a human level, when I look at this story, and I look at what decisions that people make later in the story that we will get to in due course, I think it makes a great deal of sense to say that probably vague assurances were made, that probably William had expectations that he would follow Edward. The basis of those expectations might have been flimsy, but they were probably there. And that was probably, in the long term, the most destabilizing thing Edward could have possibly done for the future of England.
Yeah.
Where he's essentially got these three men, or two men and a Hungarian boy, who he is sort of, on some level, he's promised something to.
Yeah.
By 1066. And that is the reason why this conflagration will become inevitable. But the important point, right, is that what we can learn from Norman sources not talking about this meeting is that any agreement that was or wasn't made between Edward and William was made in secret.
Yes.
If it did happen, which it probably didn't, it was not publicized.
Yes, because even until Edward dies, like his dying words on his deathbed are also unknown. We have no idea at any point ever of what Edward intended in terms of his succession.
He is this absolute enigma.
He is such a strange guy.
And he's so interesting because he is at the center of all of this, but he's the guy that, of all of our protagonists of this story, we have a pretty good idea of the kind of personality and interests and pursuits of Harold Godwinson, William the Bastard, and Harald Hardrada. They're not tough guys to figure out. Edward the Confessor, I have no fucking idea what he's trying to do at any point.
See, that's a sign that you don't have ADHD. Because I see so much of myself in him. The number of times
Overcommitting
I've
yourself.
overcommitted myself and been like, oh, yeah, I can probably be there at 12 o'clock, knowing full well that I have to be somewhere else at 1 o'clock, and just in the back of my mind being like, oh yeah, I can make it work.
Yeah.
And I just end up disappointing everyone.
Yeah.
Tu laissais bien. J'ai sur moi tes yeux et ton parfum. Demain, je m'ennuierai seul encore plus loin. Tu le sais, tu le sais, tu le sais.
We're going to take an absolute handbrake turn away from England right now and return to another one of the settings that we've set up in this series, which is Sicily. Sicily in the south of Italy. So we were briefly there in the last episode with Harald Hardrada. I briefly mentioned that there are a contingent of Norman mercenaries fighting alongside Harold and the Varangians and the Byzantine army. But why are they there? What does that mean? And what does that mean for the future of Italy and also for the future of Normandy? Let's touch on that very briefly because I think it is important. So, in the early 11th century, a lot of Normans were fleeing the political instability in Normandy and in France more broadly, and so made their way south to the Mediterranean for reasons that are very complicated and vary by the person. Some of them came as pilgrims, but others arrived very much as mercenaries because there was a lot of money to be made as a mercenary in 11th century Italy. Essentially, there were three main kind of factions who were just sort of, again, in a Mexican standoff with one another over the future of southern Italy. So the first of these and the most powerful individual faction were the Roman/Byzantine Empire, who had on and off controlled southern Italy since the time of the Emperor Justinian. But they were distracted because their eastern frontier was being pressured by the growing power of the Seljuk Turks, a plotline that I'm sure will have no ramifications further down the line. Which meant that the local Roman governors in Italy were undersupplied and isolated.
It's all taking place in the same world, huh?
Yeah, it's the medieval cinematic universe, also known as real life.
It's crazy that like we live in the same world that like knights used to live in.
It's awesome. It's good. So this obviously led to a wave of rebellions across Italy as the various local princes seized their moment to throw off imperial rule. A lot of these princes, by the way, were Lombards, who were a sort of... We don't have time to get into the Lombards. They're vaguely German Italians.
Yep.
They're just sort of around. And the last of these factions is the sort of ambient concept of Islam. So the Fatimid Caliphate, who were the Muslim Caliphate who controlled North Africa and also Sicily, were on the decline, which left Sicily in the control of an independent emirate, which was the point at which... the Byzantines decide, hey, I think we can make a go of reconquering Sicily now that it's sort of isolated from the wider Muslim world. So obviously, with all of these different factions fighting each other, it was a fantastic opportunity for enterprising warriors to make their name. And as a result, you can find Normans fighting on the sides of the Byzantines and the Lombard princes from 1010 onwards. in the 1030s, Prince Sigurius of Naples, who's one of these sort of local Lombard princelings, granted the county of Aversa in Campania to the mercenary Norman Rainulf Drengo, who essentially turned his little part of Campania into a staging post for Norman adventurers across Italy, a sort of Everest base camp for going and shaking down Italian villages. So supposedly, the Normans of Aversa elected a sort of informal leader, a man called William de Hauteville, who was called William Ironarm. Now, William Ironarm, you may remember, was part of the Norman mercenary contingent who had fought in Sicily under Harold Hardrada and the Byzantine army, but by no means was he committed to them and their kind of interests. So from the year 1040 onwards, Norman activity in Italy became more explicitly less about sort of serving the interests of the various factions who were already there and about conquering your own territory. Because essentially, again, it is the Wild West. When you have this much political instability, these many factions, you're like, well, wait a minute, why don't I just go and take some of this? And so the Normans start carving out these small-scale little domains for themselves across the boot of Italy. And they eventually form an anti-Byzantine coalition with some local Lombard princes, and gradually this coalition is able to drive the Byzantines out of the south of Italy entirely. Now, do you want to guess what the Normans did when they conquered different parts of Italy? Do you want to know what they built?
Motte and Bailey castles?
They built so many castles.
Yep.
Castles were the key technology that they used to project power. So again, a local Norman would show up, find a suitably imposing hill, put a keep on it, and then extract taxes from the local Italians. This is why that Italian monk is writing history of the Normans. He's like, who are these people? Where the fuck have they come from? Why are they ruining my country? So in 1043, the Lombard prince Guimar of Salerno recognized the Norman conquests in Italy and acclaimed William Ironarm as Count of Apulia and Calabria. So like a huge chunk of southern Italy is now explicitly a Norman county. William Ironarm died in 1046, but Norman power continued to expand under his brother Robert Guiscard, who became Count of Apulia and Calabria in 1057. And the Roman historian Anna Comnena gives us a brilliant description of him and his character. Hey, I'm from Greece. This Robert was Norman by birth, of obscure origins, with an overbearing character and a thoroughly villainous mind. He was a brave fighter, very cunning in his assaults and on the wealth and power of great men, in achieving his aims, absolutely inexorable, diverting criticism by incontrovertible argument.
Wow.
Yeah.
He sounds hot.
You're just saying that because I did it in a sexy Greek accent.
Yeah.
So Robert led these, essentially, further invasions of the last outposts of Byzantine power in southern Italy, and in 1061 he launches his own invasion of Sicily over a decade after the Byzantines last sort of made a crack at it. So Robert's victories brought him fame back in Normandy, and this reached the ear of the young William the Bastard. Ooh. So according to William of Malmesbury, Duke William was deeply envious of Robert's great victories, and the Duke said, It would be a shame to be outdone by a man of much lesser birth than me. So, as we've established, William is watching his, this random dickhead from Normandy have all these successes while he is continuing to be accosted by, idiotic local French politics. So, to the south of Normandy lies the county of Anjou, who was ruled by this time by Godfrey, quote, the Hammer of Anjou, son of the great warlord Fulk the Black, which is the most Redwall-ass name I've ever heard. That sounds like he should be a mink. I don't know if they had minks in Redwall. So the Dukes of Anjou had much like the Normans, had been relentlessly kind of expanding, capturing territory from the northern counties in central France. But Geoffrey eventually turned his attention northwards. So Anjou and Normandy were separated by the county of Maine, which was neutral. Yes, like the state. Gotta go to get my lobster. I'm gonna take the Downeaster to Portland, and then I'm gonna go to I got a cabin by Lake Sebago.
Yeah, Lake Sebago. It's in Anjou.
So in 1051, the Count of Maine died, and the people ostensibly invited Geoffrey to become their overlord. I'm sure they did that very enthusiastically and spontaneously. So William was having none of it, so he marched on the town of Ancillon, which had declared for Anjou. So the Norman army first lay siege to a fortress outside of the town, where the defenders mocked William by beating animal hides and shouting pelter, basically calling him a tanner, which was a reference to his ostensible grandfather's origins. So in response, when the fortress fell, William had the hands and feet of 32 men cut off, and the town of Ancillon surrendered very quickly afterwards for some strange reason. So I'm going to pause here and just point out, this is very often presented in the sources and in modern writing about the Norman conquest as, this is a foreshadowing of something. And I do think that there is, and you can question how authentic this is, but I do think that we can learn two things from this that certainly match with later decisions that William will make, which is that he seems to be genuinely pissed off by suggestions that he's illegitimate or somehow, not sufficiently noble. And he has a tendency of responding to slights against this with overwhelming and some might say, very disproportionate violence. He's got a fucking massive chip on his shoulder. And again, very important, you can question the veracity of these claims. Is this people writing afterwards to kind of puff up him as a kind of this guy who is a very short fuse and
is a total despot.
Is a total despot, and also, in the words, to paraphrase Dracula Flo, will fly into a violent rage at the slightest hint of criticism or pushback.
Yeah. And, you have to question how much that was necessary to make your living back then. Maybe it was a bit necessary. Maybe the guy who was the most violent and ruthless, as opposed to the most compromising, was the guy whose, legacy was borne out by history.
Well, I think there's two ways to look at it, which is, number one, was that kind of necessary? Possibly. Number two, were William's actions and his tendency towards, again, very, very seemingly vindictive violence, were they Machiavellian? Was he trying to instill terror?
Yeah.
For its own sake, for political gain? Or was he genuinely a guy who felt slighted, who felt like he was vulnerable because of his origins to being delegitimized? It's an open question. I don't know the answer. So when the city fell, William returned home, but when he got back, he had to repel not one but two invasions by Anjou, both of which were backed by the King of France, who decided that they needed to clip his wings a bit after supporting him previously. But he did manage to repel both of them reasonably easily, and in doing so consolidated his position so much that he was able to invade and annex Maine in 1063.
And he's forged in fire, William, because he is really, his kingdom and his holdings are more stable at this point, but nevertheless, he is dealing with sort of threats from every side, and he's dispatching them quite swiftly. And I think 3 or 4 years before he sets sail for England, he's also dealing with a war in Brittany.
Yes. So presumably in preparation for going to England, either, to invade or to be welcomed with acclamation as their rightful king, William reached out to the Duke of Brittany and said, "Hey, if I leave, will you not invade?" And the Duke of Brittany said, "Go fuck yourself."
At least he was forthcoming.
His name, by the way, was Duke Conan, which is great.
Duke Conan,
Conan,
the civilized guy.
I love that Conan is just like pretty generic Breton name. As William is preparing for a conflict with Brittany, again, presumably to shore up his position in the event that the throne of England becomes vacant, something very serendipitous happens to him, which is that Harold Godwinson, the Earl of Wessex, just washes up.
Yeah.
On the shore of Normandy.
There's varying accounts of how this happened. I think one of the Anglo-Saxon chronicles says he was on a fishing trip, which is so unlikely.
Well, one of the theories that I've heard is that he was there. He had intended to go to Normandy anyway to secure the release of some hostages, because he kind of knew that conflict with Normandy was coming.
I think it's fair to say at this point in the early 1060s, it's becoming pretty clear to everyone in England and Normandy that, first of all, Edward is going to die without an heir, and second of all, Harold Godwinson will not become King of England without at least some resistance from the Normans, who feel as if they are entitled to the English throne. So I think, the idea that Harold is not doing this, sailing trip with the intention of trying to sort of sort out, or at least sort of size up the situation in Normandy is pretty doubtful. But it is really, because this one is really well attested.
Yes, it definitely happened.
This one did happen. And it's,
why did this happen?
The future King of England washed up on the shores of Brittany 2 years before assuming the throne? We don't know.
And and it's not like he arrives initially as like an expected guest.
No.
He does get washed up. He gets found by a local lord who brings him as a, well, again, they say guest, but really hostage to William, essentially saying like, what should I do with this?
Yeah, so
the Earl of Wessex has arrived at my house.
Yeah, because the Normans, the Norman records say that Harold was going there to swear his loyalty to William.
Yes, which he would not have done.
No.
And then Harold spends several months as a guest at William's court, and I use guest in huge quotation marks. And this is the point at which I find this period so interesting. It's maybe, to me, the most interesting point in the entire story. Because what the fuck did they talk about? Surely Harold would understand that he's essentially a hostage. He could get killed. Bluntly, that's on the cards. Lots of people have died in in even more suspicious circumstances than this, in this story. Like, to me, I just picture the two of them sitting across the table, like fucking 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Yeah.
And I get this, I just can't shake the sense that there's this kind of almost psychological warfare happening between them. This is, again, totally unsubstantiable. There's no way to prove it either way, but it's like, do you not think that William would exert some pressure on this guy who he knows is his main rival?
It's crazy. It's so long ago, 1,000 years ago, and so much has been lost to the historical record that we will never really know. But it is the idea of them as these almost counterparts to each other. They're both sons of bastards. I mean, neither of them literally, but they are both like true bastards, you know. Harold's father is Godwin, who is like the biggest rat in England. And, William's father is Robert, the usurper, the guy who killed his own brother. And they're just both, I think, William has this chip on his shoulder from being the bastard and, the only son who's left to carve out through sweat and blood and tears his place. And Harold is, this kind of young upstart.
I would be really interested to know, has anybody ever written a play about this?
I wonder.
Because I would fucking... There's
I
so
would
much
eat it up.
material.
I would eat it up.
Like, it's so... Like, this is the part of the story that is the most psychological, if that makes sense.
Yes.
It's the most interpersonal, and it's also the point at which we know the least.
Yes. I mean, Harold spends quite a bit of time in Brittany in the company of William. And
well, he fights at the Battle of Dinant.
Yeah, they even fight side by side, which is really interesting because soon he will set sail back to England, and 2 years later they will meet again under extremely different circumstances.
So Harold, he also apparently saves 2 Norman soldiers from quicksand at one point. He's a cool dude. So when they got back from Brittany on campaign, William knights Harold. He knights him.
Crazy.
This is a very honorable and brave man.
But again, it's hard, it's hard to know exactly what the dynamics of this would have been because Harold is there at William's mercy.
Well, and
William could kill this guy.
Yes.
You have to wonder, was William trying to, create a situation where Harold was indebted to him?
Well, no, absolutely. Because think about what knight means in this context. It doesn't... When we think of somebody being knighted, we're like, let's knight Steve Clark for getting Scotland to the World Cup. But that's not what knight means right now. Right now, in this point in the story, knight means you are my man.
Yeah.
You are my servant. So it's his way of saying, yes, I'm honoring you for your bravery and recognizing that you're a great warrior, but this means that you are my feudal vassal.
Call me daddy.
Exactly. And Norman sources claim, and English sources don't really refute this, which is interesting, that Harold then swore an oath on sacred relics to William to support his claim to the English throne.
Qui me délivrera de ton corps, de tes doigts, de ta bouche, qui me délivrera, qui me délivrera.
Of course, we all know what happens 2 years later. In January 1066, Edward the Confessor died, and in an unusually short space of time, Harold Godwinson gets himself crowned King of England. Now, according to the chronicler Wace, who wrote in the 12th century, so over 100 years later, William heard the news that Harold had himself crowned king when he was out hunting. And William received the news and then immediately returned to Rouen, utterly silent and utterly furious. And that is where we will leave you. We have arrived at 1066. All of the pieces are in place, and we can see suddenly just how vulnerable, how tense, how unstable this situation is. The various machinations that have followed, first the death of Canute, and then the sort of the conflicts over the disintegration of the North Sea Empire, and finally the failure of Edward the Confessor to create a suitable, legitimate male heir, have created not only a massive vacuum at the height of the English state, which, remember, is the most real country maybe in all of Northern Europe, but it has also created a web of obligations and a web of promises that can only unravel in the most violent way possible. Yes, Harold Godwinson was obviously the most powerful man in England, and if this conflict had been resolved peacefully, he probably would have remained the most powerful man in England. But over the sea, as I've said before, the wolves are circling. There is the greatest warrior of the 11th century is sitting in Norway, and thinking, why don't I have a crack at it? Fuck it, let's be legends.
England's most bedraggled kitten is meowing in his ear, saying, I think we should go over and, have a crack at it.
And you can see what will follow, the battle royale to come, that we will explore in the next episode, is absolutely and completely the result of psychology. And I find that endlessly interesting. And psychology and informal promises and conversations and expectations that have been made to one another. Take Harald Hardrada. Yes, there was this legalistic argument that the Norwegian kings had been pressing that they were the rightful inheritors of Knut's throne in England. But the reason, according to the Norse sources themselves, the reason Harald Hardrada makes for England in 1066 is because of personal promises that Tostig Godwinson made out of spite and revenge, wanting to tear his brother down by any means possible. And likewise, in Normandy, nobody in Normandy thinks that there's anything in writing that says that William is the rightful king of England. It is purely based on any claim that he might have is purely based on his relationship with Edward. And conversations with Edward and Harold that may or may not have happened and were definitely not recorded in any reliable way.
None of it was ever written down, and that's what makes it such a compelling story, because we get to draw out these utterly human forces that guided people's actions, and we will be guiding you through the convergence of those forces in the next episode. However,
we need to go and eat stew. So that is just about going to do us for this episode of the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. We will see you in 2 weeks for the conflagration. It's all gonna come down to this: Englishman versus Viking versus Norman. The battle of our times. The battle that will determine the future of England in ways that will still be felt undeniably to this day. I think that what's remarkable about the Norman Conquest is you can make lots of arguments that ordinary people did not feel the effects and the importance of dynastic conflicts in the Middle Ages. You cannot make that argument about the Norman Conquest of about the succession crisis in 1066 and the conquest that follows. This will change England forever.
This guy says he's English. Let's throw him in jail.
You just did 3 accents in 2 seconds.
That was my Norman in England shortly after
You sounded
the
like
Conquest.
Shrek.
This man that says he is English, I think we should throw him in jail.
He's Polish, if anything.
I think we should throw Englishmen in jail.
Russian. Anyway, so if you liked this podcast, then please do leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice.
And hey ho, thanks for getting us to 1,000 5-star reviews, or an average of 5 stars after 1,000 reviews on Spotify. We love you guys, and it makes it all worth it. And, we don't say this often, but we don't make a penny off of this podcast. Yeah. We do it out of the love in our hearts, and have done for over 2 years now. So, yeah, any feedback and support you guys can show us with your words, and by leaving us good reviews, we deeply, deeply appreciate. As always, there is a Weird Medieval Guys official Discord, which you can join. Link will be in the bio. And as always, we beseech and implore you to leave us a comment if you enjoyed this podcast, and we will read out some of our favorites on the next episode. And here are some favorites that we got recently. So on our Norman Conquest Part 2 episode, this is one of my favorite comments we've ever gotten from Rach. Me if I was an 11th century servant of the new king in what is now England. #serving Knut. So good. Thank you, Rach. That really made my day. And Patchwork, who says, I'm so confused. Is Joe Mason a real person or just Aaron doing a character voice? They sound so similar. I have trouble telling them apart. I said, I just want to put this out in the open. I said, a bit like the Holy Trinity, Aaron and Joe are aspects of the same person experienced as different people. Hope that helps.
What's the third part of the Trinity?
The ghost.
No, but of this Trinity.
Oh, it's just the spirit of podcasting.
Yeah.
The divine muse who speaks through people when they podcast. And on that note, it's been a great time, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we will speak to you guys very soon when we wash up on the shores of Hastings with our horses in our boats.
As they say in Normandy, take it easy.
Je donnerai tous mes jours à venir. Tu le sais, tu le sais, tu le sais bien. Je sens que je vais m'en revenir, dormir près de toi, rien qu'une nuit, et mourir. Tu le sais, tu le sais, tu le sais bien. Qui me délivrera de ton corps, de tes doigts, de ta bouche, qui me délivrera, qui me délivrera, enfin.